Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we talk about surround sound and where it's going, what it is. We're getting ready to move Office Hours to 5.1 here on YouTube, and so we're pretty excited. So we're starting to talk about it. In the next couple of weeks, you'll see us start to experiment with it. I don't know if it'll all work, but we'll find out. Anyway, so we're going to talk about surround sound. We've got an incredible audio panel here today. A lot of great experts. So if you have audio questions, especially, ask those questions now. But any media questions are great. So let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Mitch, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. Our first question is coming to us from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Thoughts on the quality of the new Saramonic Vlink2 wireless? The talkback feature alone seems quite useful. Thanks.
Go ahead, Karl.
Hard to talk about the quality. They're still on pre-order at the moment, but it's 2.4, so just be wary of that. So if you're by yourself in the middle of nowhere, it's not so bad. If you're in a crowded convention center, maybe not the best. But the talkback is quite good. It uses TRRS on the receivers, so it's you could simply just use, AirPods or earpods. Or anything that has a TRRS kind of receiver that can go into it. But on the actual transmitter end, so on the talent end, you actually have two screw lock 3.5s. So it actually has twos. So you're not actually using that kind of headset receiver on there. You actually got two separate outputs, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the 2.4 is the interesting part. But if that suits your production, not a problem. It's a pity it doesn't record. Being a Chinese brand, it'd be nice if they just put like a micro SD recorder in there, then that'll tick every box, pretty much. But when it comes out, I'm sure someone on the panel will get one and test them out, and we'll hear more.
Yeah, it looks the talkback looks amazing. I mean, just having talkback it looks amazing. The 2.4, of course, is exactly what Karl said. We don't know if that's going to work in all areas. If you're running and gunning in a relatively and pretty close and not in a congested environment, it should work perfectly. A lot of us use the Rode Go's. They're similar in nature. The talkback is key because right now a lot of us have been using two Rode Go's, reversing the back and forth so that we can make this all work. Having it all in one transmitter makes it a huge upgrade. I could see us, like, for cooking type shows and everything else, sending these out. They're relatively inexpensive, less expensive than the Rodes for a single person. And so I think that it's a pretty good value. Go ahead, Courtney.
It may be handled different on a digital receiver, but usually when you have a transmitter and receiver in the same package, it reduces the sensitivity of the receiver because the transmitter kind of swamps it. So I don't know
if it'll do that on 2.4.
It may be switching back and forth between receive and transmit, which is probably how it's multiplexing it. But and 2.4 does have enough punch to get through. But I found, like, I have the DJI wireless, which are on 2.4. And they were great as long as the transmitter has line of sight to the receiver. If you put it on the back of the talent, and the talent's facing your receiver, no go, not good.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because they have some pretty beefy antennas they put on these things on the receiver, and so we'll see if that makes any difference at all, or maybe that's not good for us going through us. Anyway, so we'll see how that all turns out. But I think that it looks very promising. Saramonic has been doing this for a little while, so it's not like this is a brand new brand, but we'll see how quickly we can get one to test because it does look pretty promising. Let's jump to the next question.
Tony Mobley from Noonan, Georgia. What is the best low-cost lighting solution to use with a Brio?
Go ahead, Karl.
So I'm going to suggest, no surprise, it's going to be Godox. So these are the Godox LC30s. So this is the daylight version. On the actual light itself, so it can be DC power, or it comes with an AC adapter, but you can get a battery if you want to get the accessory to run it off batteries. It has a quarter 20 on the bottom of the actual light itself, which is how the little bracket there is attached. And then on the bottom of the bracket, there's a quarter 20 and a cold tube. So it's just got quarter 20s all over it, which makes it really handy. You can buy it in daylight, or you can spend an extra $14 and get a bicolor. I'd suggest two of these. So they're about 30 watts equivalent. They have a reflector built in. You can punch them into an umbrella if you wish. But these are pretty cool as far as you can actually buy the battery adapter as well if you actually want to move these away or just run them off AC.
Sorry, Tony.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a kind of scenario with this, how this would be used. The person is using at this time just their Windows laptop. And so I'm encouraging them to get the Brio. And I also wanted to find a lighting solution that will help her, because the room that she's using has too much light. And I'm not sure that anything can be done about the room at this time. But I wanted to see if I could find something that would give her.
Is most of that light coming in from the most of the light is coming in from a window?
Yes.
And are there blinds or any kind of thing that you can close? Not to close off the light, but to cut it down a little bit?
There are curtains hanging, but not, they're I guess, translucent in terms of the sunlight is still coming through the curtains.
Mm-hmm. And are they closed right now? When you say that there's too much light, are the curtains already closed, those translucent curtains?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that usually when, and you're saying that she's too bright compared to the room with that window open.
Yeah. I asked another question earlier, several hours ago about my interview with the 93-year-old pastor. And the reason that I was asking the question is because she was one of the interviewers.
Right.
And when you're looking at the interview, you can see that there's obviously too much sunlight. My wife was the other person that was being interviewed, and there's huge contrast between the way my wife looks and the way this other person looks. Right. And so what I'm trying to do, because this is house of worship service that takes place during the day, every Sunday, for the most part, at 11 o'clock. And it's the brightest time of the day where she is. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to move to the next level. Yeah. So that's the reason I'm asking the question.
Yeah. The question is really, I don't know if you already have too much light. I don't know if an inexpensive light's going to help you. It sounds like the reason that she looks overexposed is because her background may be a little darker. And so what's happening is the Brio is just lighting up and going up to where it needs to go. So what you may need to do, and the hard part on a PC is a little harder to control the Brio as far as changing, going into manual exposure. But on a Mac, you just get something like webcam settings, and you can do that. But you may want to think about doing something else that further diffuses it, like muslin or something else that's going to further diffuse. I mean, we have expensive, diffusion that we roll up in front of windows, but having something that goes in front of that window that's just like a little stand isn't very expensive, and it may cut down that light a lot. But it's the real thing you need is manual control over the exposure on the camera, because what it sounds like, if she's blowing out, it sounds like what's happening is that the background is too dark. It's auto exposing for the entire image, and it's basically she's a lot brighter than what's behind her. I mean, that's my guess, but I don't think light, unless you have a lot of light for the room, may not help you if you can't control the camera. Go ahead, Jeff.
Tony, what's the physical arrangement of the person, the camera, and the window?
Okay, so she does not have the Brio yet. So that's part of the problem. She is using the Windows laptop camera, built-in camera. That is what she's using. I'm pushing her to get the Brio. The setup is that she has Windows laptop on boxes so that she is standing while she is hosting the house of worship services. The laptop is high enough that there is good headroom, and she is using the Aftershock wireless headphones for her sound. So her sound is much improved because she's using the Aftershocks, but the lighting in the room is so bright that it washes her out. And so I know that, going for her, the Brio is going to be the best solution for the camera. And then I wanted to see if we could get some light that will make it more attractive viewing. Did I answer your question, Jeff?
Well, is the window behind her laptop? Is she facing the window?
It's on the side. And so the light comes in from the side. So basically, one side of her face gets more light than the other.
And
You
is
may
there
want
any
to
possibility of turning that?
Yeah. Her facing into the window would look a lot better. Like
Okay.
if there was a way for her to rotate and look through the window, I do think a Brio will improve it over almost any Windows and most of the past Mac webcams. So I think that a Brio is a good suggestion, but I would also suggest that she puts the window right behind her laptop, just exactly what Jeff said.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah. Karl?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the same question, like what's the orientation of the window to the person? So Courtney's got 90 degrees. So Courtney's a good example here. He's 90 degrees to his window, and he's got sunlight coming directly in there in Hollywood. But there's another way to do it as well, and that's actually to put the window is to face, to face 45 degrees away from Courtney. So if Courtney turned to screen left for him, 45 degrees, other way, Courtney. So if you face the other way, Courtney, go 90 degrees the other way, and then move the camera that way. So technically you're not getting the window in the background, but essentially they're being backlit. This is sometimes a little bit easier for cameras that have auto exposure where you can't control, like Windows Laptop Brio. So I found this out myself. So if you don't have the window in the shot, but have them as backlit as possible, what that does is it makes the back wall and their face the same exposure. So that's what we're trying to get to, because that's the problem you're getting against. The problem is you've got their face, because if you face the window, then their face is going to be really bright, but the back wall's still going to be dark, and the camera's still going to get confused. That's what I'm a little bit worried about. So I'm trying to figure out an orientation where the back wall and their face are in shadow, and just don't frame the window in the shot. So 45, well, technically it'll be 115 degrees away from the window. 100, yeah, that's kind of what I mean. 125 degrees away. So that it's a little bit tricky to do it, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the auto exposure to only see shadow in essence, nothing direct light. So if you had manual exposure, there's lots of stuff we could do.
Yeah.
But if we're just talking about can we rotate the person in the room, then I think having the window over their shoulder at 45 degrees and just making sure that window is not in shot, then the background and their face will both be in shadow, and the camera will take care of the rest.
I think the challenge we get into with that angle is that especially a Windows laptop or even a Brio to some degree will gain up to get that to work, and you may see more you may see more grain.
That's true,
because it's gaining up, and so when you put it right in front of them, they're going to be well exposed, and the main thing is the background going to auto expose
I'm
the
always
right way
worried
or
about the
not.
background being too dark no matter which orientation they go in. So if the background's not getting the same amount of light as the person who's right near the window, because if it's 11 o'clock, the light's pretty sharp, or it's a pretty steep angle. So
Tony, get a Brio or have her point towards the window first and see how it looks. I have a feeling it could improve pretty dramatically. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, my situation, I was going to point out my situation, is I have this light coming through this, there's a French door that's right here, and I've covered up half of it with some paper. So you might use a window shade that's translucent, still lets some light in, but knocks it down 50%. That might help you out. And what I have to do is I have to modulate my fill light, which is I waste on and off of me as the sun rises, because it changes over a period of about half an hour here in the morning. So I have to add a lot more fill light to fill in this, which makes the camera stop down a little more, which makes the super bright sunlight on my cheek not as blown out.
Let's go to the next question.
John Foltz from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. BlackMagic's ATEM 2ME controller is hopelessly backordered. No date given. For now, central control to a Tricaster control surface works. How can I change labels on the keys? They have little plastic inserts. Suggestions?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I've had this problem before. So what I find is I found this transparency film. This is from a company called Weliu, WELIU.LLC. Obviously a Chinese company, but it's transparent. There's one sheet of it there. And it's inkjet printable. So it's a transparent plastic. So I just designed my labels in Photoshop or whatever and print them out, cut them out, and stick those little plastic inserts into the keys. You got to pop the tops off those keys and those backlit buttons. And you can even print color on these transparencies. They're designed for overhead transparency sheets for printing in inkjet printers. So that's one solution.
I hit the wrong one. Next question.
Jens Olson from Sandpoint, Idaho. Are the buttons on Studio Technologies programmable, or do they have fixed functions?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
They are programmable to a degree. They latch. They can be momentary. You can even swap the colors out that allow it to be engaged. There's a fair, at least on the 205. There's a fair amount of control over that.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, what Mitch said, they are to an extent changeable in terms of whether they are in latch or momentary mode. But in terms of exactly what each button does, what it triggers, they are not. They do not change, and that is preferred by some.
I thought there was more control over them. I mean, it does. I have, like, when I open mine, I have latching, talkback. There's a couple different operating modes that it has in here, but there's a fair bit of. But yeah, it doesn't. You can have talkback be, it's just the latching, as Mickey said. I was just looking at it right now. Latching, push to talk, tap to latch. Those are the types of things. Yeah, but you can't program them like a Stream Deck. Next question.
Next question is from me, Audio Trivia. What was the preferred accessory for the classic Yamaha NS-10 speakers?
Go ahead, Jeff.
It was a tissue over the tweeter to knock down the highs just a little bit.
Really? A tissue? They put a tissue over? I heard about that, but I was like, I didn't. Here's the thing is, I heard that was what you do with those speakers, and I was like, I don't believe it. I don't believe that that's actually what you would do with a speaker, put tissue over. But and so the speakers were just a little too hot, little too. What was the deal there?
A little too harsh. Go ahead, Mitch.
Somebody said earlier before we went on the air that Bob Clearmountain was the first to do it, and it was in Mix Magazine, and then everybody was sticking this little piece of tissue over the tweeter. That's
funny. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful because if you use the toilet seat protector type tissue, which Alex has recommended using for oil absorbent in a pinch.
In a pinch. I just want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not saying you should put it in your pack. It's just like if you don't have anything else, it works well.
But I think that would have some type of resonant frequency, so it may vibrate and create a problem because it's a little bit stiffer type of tissue. So you need something absorbent but not stiff that could resonate.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Actually, my question is a little misleading because the NS-10 was a commercially available speaker, and then the NS-10M was the studio version where they supposedly fixed the diffusion problem that caused the tissue paper.
All right. Next question.
Liberty White from Atlanta, Georgia. In your opinion, what makes a good conference host? The person keeping the action moving on stage between speakers or session moderator?
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I mean, I often find that they're much more interactive than the people that are doing the presentations. And so someone that is high energy, that's kind of getting some interaction from the audience is really key, and also that can introduce people better than just reading out a biography, of the next person, but actually someone who's really engaging with them, and maybe a little interview, a couple of questions here and there or something. I think works really well. You often see the audience, the energy changes when the host comes back on. Someone that's probably a little fun as well, has a couple of jokes or things that work really well. They're not a stand-up comedian. That's not what they're trying to be, but they are just someone that's the glue in between what can often be very boring presentations. You kind of want someone to just bring a bit of levity and fun to it and interactivity.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
I was kind of scared to follow Grant because I know that he's worked with some of the best. So, but what came to me when I saw the question, Liberty, was 3 words: comfort, empathy, and awareness. It's necessary for anybody, of course, to be incredibly comfortable with themselves on stage. And I think that also just looking into the faces of those who you were working with, meaning the audience who are partners in the experience, being able to just look in their faces and know whether they need a pep up or or relaxation or whatever, and just being kind of aware of all the things going on and what's like really perfectly necessary in the moment as a transition. These were the things that came up to me, a little bit more abstract. Grant gave some more really, profound and pragmatic things, but that's what came to me.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Grant hit it on the nose. You have to find somebody with a sense of humor and someone who's listening to the previous person rather than just going with this reading off the stock intro of the next person. And somebody who's good at improv is good at doing that, so they can relate a segue from one speaker into the next by relating what the first speaker was talking about to what the next speaker up is going to talk about. So someone who can think on their feet and is listening to what the speakers are saying so that they can improvise, if necessary, a segue between the two.
Jeff?
Courtney just stole one of mine, which is that listening thing that you can relate, not only tying the two speakers together, but really getting the themes of what that person said tied into the global event, so kind of keep a running theme through it. And also someone who can ad-lib, because there will be technical problems, someone will be late, whatever, the slides are not ready, so someone that can kind of stretch and cover that time.
Yeah, and Mitchell?
All of the above and a good voice, because I think I've found that when you engage the voice, that you get everybody's attention, because it's sometimes like herding cats. You got to get everybody's attention in the room. Well, if you wield that voice like a weapon, sometimes it cuts through the clutter.
Yeah, I worked with 2 days ago. I worked with probably one of the best hosts, moderators that I get to work with, a guy named Dave Karger, and I was trying to think about like why we love Dave so much. Like when we see that Dave's going to come onto his show, I worked with him like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, and we're like, oh, it's all going to work. And I think that Dave, what I think that he does really well is he has kind of a matter of fact way of being, but he has that kind of B plus 25%, just a little bit over. He just pushes it. He pushes himself out just a little bit, and so he brings energy, but not goofy energy. But he has this kind of matter of fact, like, "Hey, how's it going? We're really glad to have you here." Like that kind of. And then the other thing he can do is he can scan a bunch of information and just own it. Like the names and titles of every person. There's like 6 people coming out, and he knows every person and their title. He knows about them. He says hi to them as they sit down. And it's just totally comfortable. It's not like he's trying to remember it and everything else. And that's a crazy short-term memory thing that a lot of hosts can do, is they can just they can glance at something and then just do it. And these are people who've done this 1,000 times. So if you're asking for what makes a good conference, this is like top level. He can just glance down, see it, go. We can talk to him in his ear, sometimes even while he's talking. He won't. He'll just keep talking. Like, it's just an incredible ability to just stay focused and do it. No, we don't do that, but we could. Some people have done it in the past with some of the shows, and he'll just keep going. He is able to build on questions, so that what we were talking about with listening, you can hear the person, and he'll come up with the next question that's going to draw something else out. I think one of the most important things for a moderator is that the moderator has to guide the show to tell the thread. One of the most important things for a moderator is to pull things out of people when they're not talking enough. So when they're saying, yep, nope, and they're having short answers, how do you pull the information out of them? And when they're saying too much, how do you cut them off? So the moderator has to cut that person off when they're talking too much, and pull it out of them when they're not talking enough. And that's probably the most important thing that a moderator can do. And then again, what everybody else said, stretch. I mean, having a moderator that can just make tap dance for another 10 minutes is gold. So anyway, next question.
Next question is from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Remote audio recording platforms like Riverside and Squadcast are limited to 16-bit audio. What is the reason for this? Is there something that gets 24-bit ISO recordings, and how much does it matter?
Go ahead, Karl.
So what you're actually comparing it to, it's 48 or 41 at 16-bit, which is CD quality or DAT quality compared to MP3. So this is essentially what you're going to get over the internet. You're always going to get compressed, like Zoom here is compressed. What Riverside is giving you is the ability to have uncompressed audio. Now, 16-bit is a consumption format, that's true. It is still 96 dB of dynamic range, so it's heaps of dynamic range, especially for spoken voice. It may not be heaps of dynamic range for a symphony orchestra when you're trying to record that, but for spoken voice, it's perfectly fine, as long as they're not clipping on their end, and I'm pretty sure the software tells them if they're clipping to check their microphone, but on that 16-bit would be perfectly fine for spoken voice.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, exactly what Karl said. It is perfectly fine, enough dynamic range for spoken voice, and it saves you 30% on your bandwidth and your storage media. So a lot of times, especially if you're recording multi-tracks, sometimes you'll have situations where you have to limit the file size to 2 gigabytes or less. And so it gives you that much more media that you can store in those 2 gigabytes, a much longer take that you can store in those 2 gigabytes if you're trying to stay under the FAT32 file size range.
Next question.
Morgan Price is back with another question. George Whitman is running a webinar for universal audio interfaces for voiceovers. What is the panel's recommended UAD plugins for spoken word for live events?
Go ahead, Mickey.
For spoken word, you really want to be very light-handed with it. Humans are very used to hearing human voice, so you do not want to change it enough that it starts to become uncomfortable for people to listen to. Hi, Mitch. For the UAD plugins.
Wow.
For the UAD.
Mickey is back and he's swinging the sword. Anyway, go ahead.
For UAD plugins, I skimmed through their list of plugins. We might want to consider the C-Suite plugin, which is a noise suppression plugin designed in partnership with Cedar. You might want to take a look at the Universal Audio 610 emulation plugins. They are very transparent sounding EQs, as well as the Oxford EQ. And there was also the SSL E channel, wherein you have an EQ. It's a full channel strip, so there's EQ, there is compression that you can add in there. And again, you want to be very light-handed with it. Though I'd say if someone else is mixing the audio down the line from you, I would consult them first so that you know what they are expecting. If they expect raw, just send them just the microphone raw.
Next question.
And the next question coming in from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. Does Zoom have a referral program or an affiliate link for account holders? If so, what kind of accounts are eligible to participate?
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What I remember is that interesting that in March 2020, there was a referral program that existed for part of their products. But you may remember something that happened around March 2020 that was quite positive for Zoom. They did pretty well from that point on. I don't know that they've needed a referral program. They went from around. I was looking at some numbers recently that was charting the number of daily active users that they had, and or even just minutes of people using it. Even the webinar went from, in January 2020, 3 billion webinar minutes. In April 2020, 42 billion. And so needless to say that Zoom's done pretty well without a referral program. I don't think they have one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they bring that back. It's an interesting thing. I have to admit I never pay attention to referral programs, but I probably should. So I think that it'll be interesting to see if they have it. We'll do some more research on that as well. Next question.
Roberto Barrow from Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. What's the difference between Ubiquiti Network's UniFi managed power over Ethernet plus 16-port gigabit switch with an SFP 150 watts and the Edge version of the switch?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the difference between the UniFi product line and the Edge product line is primarily their configurability. You can do a lot more with the Edge line, though sometimes it does entail having to jump into doing configuring the switch or the router via SSH, which I don't fully understand. I copy and paste off of Google searches. And of course, the UI. The UI of the UniFi line is a lot more prosumer-centric, a lot more visual, as opposed to the Edge line, which is like more, how do you say it, administrative, I guess.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jason.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Next question.
Next question in from Alex Lindsay in Novato, California, asking for a friend. What is the best way to normalize and make all the audio the same level, especially but not only in a video in Final Cut Pro?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Excuse my extreme pedantic reading of this question. Why would you want all the audio to be the same level? You don't make all the pixels the same color and the same brightness.
I think the question is, it literally was from a friend, and I was like, I have a way that I do it, but I was like, we have such a great panel here today. I was like, I wonder how everybody approaches this. So it's really like, you have a bunch of people, you have a bunch of recordings of people, and you have, there's what they're talking about, and you want them to all just feel like they're, it's evened out. And so I was just curious because it was a discussion on another place, and I was like, this is such a great set of experts that I should ask them to see what they think. So it's not, it's how do we make, like, let's say level. Appropriate. They're all at an appropriate level, and they all sound kind of glued together. So go ahead, Jeff.
That's mixing. Okay. That's listening and adjusting the levels so that they sound right. Yep. Faders. Go ahead. Turn up the quiet ones, turn down the loud ones.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, faders. But if I know a lot of video editors are used to normalizing to get that work done. But I don't know exactly with Final Cut, but a lot of NLEs have, if you right-click on the audio clip, you could see a normalize function there. But one thing I want to say to that is you'd want to either normalize to RMS or to loudness, not to peak. Because an audio clip would say like a single, like uncompressed in terms of dynamics, snare hit. If you normalize that to a specific level next to someone speaking, that snare hit would sound very quiet because it's a large chance hit. So you don't want to normalize to peaks. You want to normalize to either RMS or loudness.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so specifically in Final Cut, I just love that loudness checkbox. So there's a loudness checkbox, and it has two sliders on it. One is amount and one is uniformity. And I use it all the time for spoken word. I'm someone who understands compression and played around with that, and I still come back to this all the time, and I don't fully know what it's doing, but it sounds great. And I find the numbers around 60% amount and then 10% uniformity I have found works really well most of the time for what I do. And occasionally I'll add a dB or two here and there on that whole clip. And then the new thing they added as well was that voice isolation, which is just doing some really nice background noise cleanup. There is a noise removal, and sometimes I use that on really bad clips. The noise removal can be a bit harsh sometimes, and so, but it does work well. And on the bad clips, you do all three, and you're in a pretty good spot.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I've done extensive tests looking at waveforms and adjusting the levels overall. And I'm not as familiar with Final Cut Pro, but I will recommend a plugin that you can put on the master channels just to make sure that you don't go over and you've got a consistent level. And I prefer the Waves L2 Ultra Maximizers, not just a limiter. It has a really good brick wall level setting on it, so that nothing will go over it, but you can also set the threshold so you can determine how loud it is, because it must be adjusting the relative RMS to peak level in order to get that. But the waveforms look right, and it sounds good to me. So the Waves L2 Ultra Maximizer.
Go ahead, Karl.
So I would get a Final Cut done in Final Cut Pro. And then what you want to do is you export your audio to Logic. Logic has way more tools for this particular job, and then just put it into Logic. So you want to have a Final Cut, so the file you put into Logic is the same time, and then you can just drop it back in, and you can A/B comparison. But as Grant said, there are limited tools in the loudness settings which kind of do a similar job, but in in Logic, you have deep tools to do this kind of stuff. As Mickey said, you actually get to choose RMS, you get to choose what you're normalizing to and all that kind of stuff. So you have all those tools that Mickey's talking about in Logic, but you do want to lock your picture first, so your time doesn't change for your audio.
Yeah, I think a lot of Final Cut editors they're trying to get something out and they just don't want it to sound wrong. Like it's just like, we just want it to just like, and it sounds like the loudness kind of thing may fix a lot of those things. It'll be interesting. I actually haven't used that tool in Final Cut. So I'm going to go play with it. All right, next question.
Andre Dole from Berlin. Are there minimum specs for devices using Unity Intercom Client? Any best practices, tips, and tricks for using Unity?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I don't know what the minimum specs are, but I have a slew of old iPhones and iPod Touches that I use for Unity, including an iPhone 6 and iPhone SE, first generation SE, and they work fine. Tips and tricks: if you're using a mobile device, make sure if you're using an external headset or a Bluetooth headset, make sure that those are connected and plugged in first prior to you launching the Unity app.
Yeah, go Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that having a dedicated device for Unity is best, right? Often we are using our main phone for it, and inevitably that causes all sorts of problems, right? You get a phone call, and now, in fact, I was on Unity today, and I kept trying to talk to this guy, and then I could see him. He was on the phone, like he was just taking a phone call, so he was completely not on Unity anymore. So having a dedicated device is really good. Sorry, and I'll just say also, thinking about charge, it is a battery drain, and so having it connected to power is really good. And so I have used phones quite a lot, and I'm quite happy with that as a dedicated touching device that you can just hit when you're sitting in front of a control panel. But I have used it on PCs and Macs as well to great effect. And there's some using Companion or a Stream Deck native software, you can do some really cool buttons and integration there as well. It all works great. It's an incredible application that we use a lot.
I was on the way to a show, and so I just jumped onto it on my phone, and I was a little late, and so I just I'm just going to jump on Unity to make sure that everything's going well. This is just a couple of days ago, and then I just didn't get off of it. Just working, and then you're working away, and then of course my sisters and my mom and everything else decided to do a group FaceTime, and I get this call, and it just shuts you. Unity just disappears, and there's this face, and you can't get rid of it. FaceTime will not let you quit. So I'm just sitting there like, oh my goodness, like we're in the middle of the show. I'm not running the show, so I was just sitting there, but I was just like, I can't get out of this comms. So I very much underline the need for not to do that. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I sometimes leave Unity on by mistake because I'm running it on my M1 and it's coming up through my console. Mm-hmm. So I'll be in the middle of recording a car dealership spot for somewhere in Dallas, Texas, and all of a sudden I'll hear Mickey yelling to me about something, and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? So I'm thinking next time that happens, Mickey, I'm going to leave it in.
Yeah, there you go. It might add a lot to the spot. Next question.
From James Fosline in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on a Shure MV7, does connecting to USB and XLR at the same time reduce the output on each connector?
Go ahead, Karl.
No. So
yeah, there we go. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Karl's right. It shouldn't but one thing you got to watch out for, it shouldn't because the USB converter is a high impedance input device, so it bridges the input before it goes out to that transformer or whatever it's using for an output, a balanced output. So it shouldn't affect the output. One thing you do not want to do is mix the two together in a computer or external mixer. Don't mix the USB output of that with the XLR output, because it will probably be slightly out of phase and cause comb filtering and other bad stuff.
Next question.
Tony Mobley from Noonan, Georgia. I'm not satisfied with my hosting of conversations with Tony Mobley. I want to get better. I want suggestions from the panel on how I can get better during the conversation.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned over the last year is that I need to get out of the way. And so I think that I'm pretty good at doing that, but I want to go to the next level. I want to get to the next level. And so I really want the panel suggestions.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, Tony, I think that it was brilliant to call the show Conversations with Tony Mobley, because that's what you're doing. You're having a conversation with people. You're not necessarily interviewing them or interrogating them. You are having a conversation with them, and that's something that you do really well. And I think that something that we all benefit from is playing to our strengths. I think specifically one of your strengths is that you are thoughtful and you're insightful when you speak. And so playing to that more, I think an opportunity for you is to be really clear about where it is that you're going. Sometimes when I hear you speak, I know you have an idea and you're working out that idea as you speak. The more that you can have it clear where it is that you're going before you start speaking, the faster it is and the more efficient it is. But I really think that you talk about getting out of the way. Yes, you're creating space for people to speak, but ultimately it's about having wonder and just an interest in the person and diving into more and more of that wonder and interest. And the more that you do that, everyone else comes along with them. And so I think there's lots there, and I think people are really enjoying your show. And I love the fact that you're saying that you're not satisfied. If you were, I think the show would start going downhill. Always stay dissatisfied. It's going to make the show better.
I like to call that mind the gap. So anyway, between perfection and where you were at, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, there's this paradox between being prepared and being present, and the times that I've most enjoyed you, Tony, on your show are the times even when you were interviewed, or where the script kind of goes away, the questions go away, and there's some laughter, there's something that breaks. So there's this, just as Grant said, you are thoughtful, and you are wise. You bring so much wisdom to the table and so much beauty, and whenever that shows through the preparation, that's the best. So it's kind of ironic to say, yeah, be prepared and thoughtful about what you're doing. And at the same time, the more you let go, I think the better host you become, because you're connecting with the person and the subject matter at hand. So yeah, you're beautiful. Don't go changing and all that.
Yeah. And I think that the challenge for you is to not try to be a great host. And what I mean by that is that I can see it sometimes in the gears in your head of you're trying to do something when who you are is great. Like, and I don't mean that as kind of a, wu-wei kind of thing, but I'm just saying that there's moments where we see you and you've got this energy and this focus and this connection with folks. And then there's times when I feel like you're trying to do something, and the key is to, and what the different, how do you get rid of that is practice, which is you're doing. So, and it's just it's pulling out that stuff, looking at what you did and noticing that and trying to notice that. Notice when you felt like you were just there, and notice when you feel like notice when you're starting to think about something like, oh, I should be doing this. I should be talking this way. I should be doing that. That is the part that is the hardest thing to get rid of, in that process. And it takes just practice. I mean, when you see someone like Leo Laporte or something, just remember that, or Michael Krasny, which we've done. And the thing, I would listen to Michael Krasny's show. This is the Gray Matter with Michael Krasny. Listen to him because he's probably one of the best as far as interviewing goes. But when he's in it, he's just in his zone. Like he just goes into that Leo's triangulation is a good one to look at too. Those are pretty good interviews there. But it's that dance, of dancing with that person and hearing that and then being able to build on it. But I think that there's something about when you interviewed me, there's something about how you are that I don't want you to lose trying to be a good host. That there is, I felt like I got the first part of the show, I felt like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. It's really slow. About 20 minutes in or 30 minutes in, we were in this other space that I don't think I've ever been in when I was, like being interviewed. There was this kind of dreamy we're just covering things and wandering through, and it was really special. So I don't want you to, I want you to, I think that there's places for you to constantly improve, but I don't want you to lose that thing, because that thing is is unique to you. And that's what makes hosts great hosts too also, is they have a way of doing it. And so you don't want to lose that way of doing it, because that methodical and that focused nature, it's just that, but there's something there that, there's still stuff to scrape away, but don't lose that piece, because I think it's really special about your show. Next question.
And it's from Todd Perry in Prescott, Arizona. When sending out remote kits with a Mac laptop, what is everyone's preferred remote desktop solution? Something that will work consistently without access to router settings.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, it used to be TeamViewer. It was like you could do Stu free, and it was just easy. And then it just feels like they got greedy. And then it just was like you can't do it free, and they start detecting if it seems like it's commercial and all of that. And so I just ran away from that. Yeah. But actually what I use now is remotedesktop.google.com. Is free, built into Chrome. Totally free, no ads, nothing. It just works really well across all the platforms. remotedesktop.google.com.
For our producers, we've got a lot of questions in here, so make sure to go in there and try to find ones you want to vote up, because it's a busy day. Go ahead, Jeff.
So this is my preferred. This is my in a pinch, the one I always forget about. But in a Zoom meeting, if the person shares their screen, you can request control. And so I've used that to get people out of a pinch when I've needed to fix something on a computer remotely. Just wanted to remind everyone of Zoom control.
Yeah, one of the things that we do also is AnyDesk, and the idea is that when it pops up, it'll show up for us, and then we can grab onto it. Also, a reminder that Parsec, which we had on the show a couple months ago, is now available on the Mac, and we're pretty excited about that. Next question.
Raj Shandil from Los Angeles, California. For high-end audio-only podcasts like the American NPR shows, it feels like the audio has a deeper low-end filter on it. What additional filters or audio changes are being done to them?
Go ahead, Karl.
So essentially it's mic technique. Most of the people who do audio only, especially like NPR stuff, they will speak very close to the microphone. So they're literally less than 6 inches away. And if they're playing at home, you want to know the equipment they're using. So Ira Glass on This American Life, this is what he used, and this is a quote directly from Neumann's website. This is the only dynamic microphone made by Neumann. It's made specifically for broadcast and podcasters. They made it specifically for this.
I thought you said they made it specifically for Ira Glass.
Well, we don't know that, but you do see they quote the word American, because this is a microphone used on This American Life by Ira Glass. And this is the one that NPR generally buy, and you can get them quite easily, but it is the only dynamic mic made by Neumann.
And by the way, if you're listening to the show and you've never heard This American Life, it is the finest crafted audio show made. Like, it's just the level of production value is insane. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, aside from mic technique, they do use microphones that are more flattering in the low end. It's tough. The low end in general is tough to control, both like in a room and also in terms of capturing. And if you have a good environment, good microphone technique, you do not feel, as an engineer, you would not feel the need to hide that low end. You can preserve that and maybe even accentuate it with processing down the line. And Raj asked about what other filters are added. Standard filters, EQ and dynamic range compression are what come to mind. Those two, in addition to reverb, are your top 3 tools that you use in mixing.
Good, Mitchell, real quick.
Raj, I'm glad you asked that question, because here in the US of A, we like our microphones. We love to work that proximity effect, because that definitely has that radio sound. And most of us also have a channel processor like the AFX, Mickey.
Go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
And post-production, because, This American Life and Radio Lab, my other favorite NPR well-produced audio.
So good.
They go to great detail with sound design and mixing in music and sound effects and location sound. And they're very well produced and edited and mixed, unlike live broadcast like this one.
Hey, we're working on it. Next question.
Jens Olson from Sandpoint, Idaho. Does the Studio Technologies 209 or 205 have the Daute chip to do the clocking, or do you need another Daute device?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, pretty much all the Daute-enabled devices that are in the market today include chips that are able to clock the entire network. So you should be good with those devices.
Yeah, Mitchell, real quick.
Yes, the Studio Technologies 205 does have the ability to be the leader, but you could also run a clock from Daute or anybody else that has a decent clock.
Next question.
Next question from David Brady in New York, New York. Any tips or tricks in getting an old Yamaha 01 V96i to connect to a current Mac running Monterey? Software Manager loads fine, USB connection is active, but I can't get control of Surface from computer.
You may have David Brady is always the one that stumps us. He always, because he's already really smart. And so he asks these questions and we're just like, if he doesn't know it, how are we going to know it? Anyway, go ahead, Jeff.
I don't have an answer for David. I just want to go, I love that old console. That was a great thing.
See, I was going to say exactly the opposite thing.
Me too. I loved it. Oh, so good.
So that thing made
so
me
good.
so angry.
My buddy still has one and still uses it from time to time. So I don't know if he's tried the USB, but I'll ask him.
Go ahead, Grant.
I was just going to suggest, I don't know, but they have the MIDI in and out and through 5-pin DIN, and it has a very extensive control protocol for that. I wondered if it might have been a way around it, is to use a MIDI interface and be able to control it over MIDI.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you can't get Grant's solution to work, another solution I'd suggest is get you about a 25-foot length of good steel chain and bolt it to the bow and then attach it to your boat, because it weighs so much it makes a wonderful boat anchor.
So this was my first real mixer that we bought for Pixel Core. Everything else was like these little pieces of junk, and we got this thing. And I think that I just had decided that mixer made me decide I just couldn't do mixing. Like I was like, I don't understand this at all. I can't. So I definitely respect that Jeff knows more than I do, because I just was like so frustrated. Then we got other mixers like Behringer's, and I was like, oh, I can't do this. But that one's deep. It's deep. Next question.
Steve Ura from Madison, Wisconsin. Small business offsite hybrid all hands quarterly meeting using Sony A7 plus shotgun mic to cover presenters into an ATEM mini to Microsoft Teams. Neat, easy way to integrate an audience microphone.
Go ahead, Mickey.
For that, since you're starting now to go from a single mic into multiple mics, which then have to be mixed. So this is where you step into needing to have a mixer to properly match those levels and possibly even adjust the EQ on those individual channels. So I would recommend getting a small mixer. I've recommended in the past the Yamaha MG10XU. Good, decent preamps for the price, and also acts as a USB audio interface.
Good, Karl.
So if your audience mic means you're taking questions from the audience, then SM58, but you can't go plugging that into an ATEM mini. So yeah, you're right. So something as Mickey said, just a mixer that has USB. You don't want to get that mixer into the ATEM. Essentially, you can have it into USB, just like how I'm coming in now. I'm going through a Flow 8, so a Flow 8's another option you can use that has USB, of course. And you can just simply go, and the Flow 8 can be battery powered as well. So if you want to run batteries in the room, you can actually power it off a power bank that usually charges a phone. You can also power Flow 8 off that as well. So just keep that in mind. But but you want to have two separate things. So you'd have your ATEM going in via USB-C as your webcam option, and then you would have an audio interface like I have here, and a lot of us have on the panel, using mixed pre-3s and the like, where you have two different things going into the computer, one for video via the ATEMs and one for audio via our mixers. As I said, you don't want to be plugging, unless you've got XLRs, which you don't have XLRs on that particular camera, but you do want to get like an SM58 for that audience microphone to take questions. That'll sound the best in the room no matter what. Using a shotgun to pick up the room audio, that may work. If they're speaking into speakers in the room, then that can be a bit tricky. You may get a bit of echo through the room because you're hearing their voice and you're hearing the speakers. So you'll have to worry about your shotgun microphone more than your audience microphone, I think. But yeah, you want a separate mixer, like Mickey said. Just get your XLR in, yeah.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was just I took the question as talking about at atmosphere sound, trying to get the audience sound of clapping and laughing and things like that. It's really tricky. And I would say that you really want an operator who's dedicated to just listening to the sound, because the level that you want it to be at is less than what when you can hear, as Karl was saying, you can hear the speaker coming back through that audience mics, but then you want it present when they're clapping. It has to be ridden. You've got to fade it up and down with things that are going on. You want an operator on it. Most of the time we're trying to get rid of that type of sound from our main microphones. And so unless you've got an operator, I think you just get a nice clean sound of the main direct thing that you're getting content-wise.
And I will say a shotgun in a presentation environment could be pretty rough. You may want to give in those put a SM58 on a stand in front of them or something like that if they're presenting. Shotgun from the back of the room or something like that is going to be really hard to listen to, almost guaranteed. Next question.
Alex Knight, Vancouver, Canada, recently purchased a Roland V-1HD Plus. I find it odd it only supports a system frame rate of only 50 or 59.94. Should I leave my camera outputs to match, or is there any issue with feeding it 23.98 with final output at 59.94? Go
ahead, Karl.
Yeah, so the Roland stuff generally is based on broadcast, so yeah, it's 50 or 59.98. Generally, if you can, send it the same that your program is. So if your camera can do 59.98, send it 59.98. Don't send it cinema 59.94. So don't send it cinema formats. There's no use to send it to cinema format if you're doing a stream. If you're doing a record and you're playing back a record, that'll be different. You'll have to keep an eye on the inputs. This not like the BlackMagic, so unlike them, they do have one scalable input, not all of them. So keep an eye. That's usually for gaming. So keep an eye on which input. I think it's like input 4 with the Roland ones, where it's input 1 with the BlackMagic. So make sure you actually put it in the correct input. Read the manual for this kind of stuff if you need to, and then that scaling input, generally you can put anything in there and it will just convert it. But it does say it does say in the manual, I remember for the Rolands, that it may introduce aliasing. And this is a feature, not a failure. So just be aware of that too.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I agree with Karl said, unless you are going for a very specific look. If you're going for a specific look, you'd want to keep your camera sensor's frame rate at the frame rate that you want it to be at. And check to see if your camera is able to output at a different frame rate from what the sensor is set at. A lot of higher end cameras are capable of that. You can have your sensor at 24 while its SDI outputs or HDMI outputs are feeding out 59.94. That's one thing to look at. But I think from my point of view, the most important thing is the look that you want. Don't go 30 if you don't want the look of 30.
So this is a thing that I deal with a lot, 23.98 versus 59.94. It's like a half a day a week. So one thing that we found, just to kind of put into perspective, if you're streaming, we find that higher frame rates feel more visceral. So it makes the audience feel more like they're there. 23.98 feels more cinematic. It makes the audience feel more like it's a film. So you want to think about that. And 59.94 from 23.98 kind of feels like this mushy thing that happens in between, because it's basically adding a bunch of frames in between every frame. Like it's just adding, all those frames every second in, it's just making those up. So it is, if I would highly recommend when you do live to really think about that 59.94 as a great frame rate, unless you decide you want it to look filmic and you want to put it on YouTube later, or you want to do something else, then you may decide you want it cinematic. But if your primary output is the live feed, 59.94 in a couple of years, 119 by is going to be something that a lot of people are talking about. A lot of sports and other live broadcasts are looking very closely at 120 frames a second, because it makes you feel more like you're there. So you want to really think about I know that there's a lot of people are really obsessed with 24 frames. Just remember that was made up because a bunch of people in the 20s didn't want to pay more for film. Like that's our whole reason that we did this, is because people are cheap. Anyway, next question.
Peter John Golden from Santiago, Chile. Why does the Zoom login now require a commercial account?
Go ahead, Grant.
I don't believe it does. I think there has been some rebranding that Zoom has done around Zoom One, which is more of a package for lots of the Zoom products. But you can still sign up for a free account. You can log in with a free account. and you can, and then it grows from there to pro to business and enterprise. There are single sign-on where you can use enterprise systems to be able to log into a Zoom account. But I wonder if you may have just tripped across a login page that was more of a commercial login, but all the other ones are still working fine.
Next question.
And it's from Michael Forrest in London, UK. I've been dealing with a noisy building site outside my window for the last 14 months, making it difficult to record the podcast and videos necessary to grow my business. Any tips on getting compensation from the property developers?
Jeff?
That looks like it'd be difficult because you don't say that you've lost business. You're just not able to grow your business. So getting actual direct compensation might be tough. But I wonder if you could go to the property developers and see if they have another property that they could let you use an office space for filming your podcast or recording your podcast and filming your videos that's quiet away from your particular site. While that site is being worked on, they provide you with a separate office space.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, at a pinch, if all else doesn't work, I know people.
Yeah. No, the hard part is unless they're breaking any kind of actual sound laws related to it and what time and so on and so forth, the chances of getting almost anything. I had someone pounding pylons, for 3 months outside my office. So after I built a studio there, so it's not something I've tried. It's not something that, at least in the United States, works. Next question.
Next question from Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas. Question for Karl. How much separation do you have between mic and what appears to is a Steadman-style pop filter? Those pop filters need the most separation possible to be most effective. So I'm curious how much benefit you're currently getting.
And real quick, Karl?
Probably 1.5 inches, probably 4 centimeters. So I don't get too many places here. People would tell me if I did.
Next question.
Peter Belbin from Houston, Texas again. James Fosling from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Any simple programs to use MIDI controllers to create multi-keyboard commands?
Go ahead, Karl.
So I'm guessing you're talking about playing a musical MIDI controller and you want to send that keyboard maybe 2 different instruments at the same time. You can remap this indoors. So every door can pretty much do this. GarageBand to a limited extent, but then Logic, Ableton. So all these can actually send the same command to multiple tracks. So you can play multiple instruments simultaneously from a keyboard. Ableton's a pretty cool one to do this because there's a lot of porting. Reaper is another one. So that one's free as well.
Go ahead, Todd.
I'm just not quite understanding the question because I understand how Karl interpreted. I'm thinking it might be multi-keyboard commands. Are we actually talking about computer keyboards at this point too?
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the question. How can you trigger keyboard commands or keyboard shortcuts using a MIDI controller like a little 48 key pad? I know people have done it with Keyboard Maestro with an extension that is able to take control from MIDI controllers, and also on the Windows side, there's central control for that as well.
Next, and by the way, we're going to go just a little over because we got a bunch of questions and a very specialized set of experts here. So next question.
Douglas Carmichael, AWS has introduced Skill Builder subscriptions for $29 a month and include training and sandboxed lab accounts. Any experience with them?
I think you stumped us. I don't think any of us have used it. I think we just all dive into AWS and don't ask any questions, don't read any manuals, and start just banging on it. That seems to be the way most people start. But it could be good. Yeah, next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. In the earlier days of Mac in the 1980s, embossed signatures were found inside the Mac cases and hidden software gems were discovered in the OS with secret keystrokes. Does any of that levity still exist in new Macs?
Some of them I think are still hidden. There's still a couple Easter eggs that are floating around in the OS. I don't think necessarily in the hardware. It's just they're a much different company now. They're not hand making anything in the US. So I think that everything is but there's sometimes little things that you can push a couple keys. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know that there's a couple Easter eggs still hidden in a couple apps. Next question.
Philip Shane in New York. Mickey mentioned that a reverb is a standard filter in mixing. I wasn't sure if he meant that reverb is used when mixing spoken voice. If so, I'm curious how that's done, for instance. Is a little bit of added reverb a good thing in a spoken word?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, absolutely. Even with bare speech, bare VO, a lot of engineers like adding, a little bit of room or maybe a little bit of plate, barely enough. Like people cannot tell that there is reverb there, but it's just there to soften things up a bit and meld it in, especially if it's standing on its own. You want something there to shape the waveform a bit so that it's not so make it a little softer. If you're mixing VO in with other elements, then the verb on the VO is very helpful to make things glue together.
Next
Again,
question.
very light.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, had a great conversation about YouTube thumbnails. It's such a broad topic. Could we do a second hour, and what is your feeling about waveform visualizations for thumbnails and backgrounds?
I don't know what I have a feeling about that, but I think we should definitely put that in the suggestions for the second hour. I think that'd be a great subject, just talking about YouTube thumbnails, and I'll try to find some YouTubers to come and talk to us about it. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've been working through the melodics exercises for keyboard players, and my biggest roadblock is two-handed playing and switching hand positions quickly. What is the best way to practice those concepts?
Go ahead, Karl.
So simultaneous two-hand scales. Just go up the scales with two hands and make sure they're in sync with each other. You can do, you do C major first, and you can do G majors. You can do circular fifths of scales. Just what you're actually listening for is that both hands are in sync with each other. Go as slow as you need to at first to make sure you're in sync. It's not a race to see how fast you can go through your scales. What you're looking for is synchronicity. So think of it like synchronized divers. They lose points if they go out of sync. So you'd lose points. So in melodics, you'd lose points if you go out of sync regardless of your speed. So go as slow as you can, but stay in sync, and you're going to do two scales with two hands, and then go to all the different scales. You go through all the different scales on your circular fifths, your majors and your minors. And once you do that, you probably want to do a full rotation of your circular fifths of all your scales once a day. So you do major C, G major, F major, go through all the scales just once a day, two hands, as slow as you can. And once you get through it, that's it. And then you can move on to other stuff that may be a bit more entertaining to you.
Go ahead, Todd.
So there's this book that every pianist knows about. It's called Hanon, Hanon. And I wish, I wish that I had seen your question early enough. I would have pulled up the cover, because it is kind of one of the staples. And what's really nice about it is that it's unison, right, between the hands, and it goes through all the patterns that are available between 5 fingers. Do that slowly, just as Karl was articulating, and I think it could take you somewhere too.
Next question.
Next question in from Dave Oden in Johnstown, Colorado. We've got 2 Yamaha TF5s, one for our house mix and one for our stream, but every time we power them off, they lose their Daute subscriptions. They're connected together through a Netgear switch and an HP switch. Does anyone know a fix for this issue?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So Daute subscriptions are created in a controller, or sometimes in Yamaha consoles in their software, but they're stored in the devices. So you need to make sure that most of the Yamaha devices have a dip switch setting to whether they resume or whether they go back to a default setting. So you probably don't have a resume setting on. The other thing might be, are you losing anything else in the Yamahas? Do you have a problem with one of those little coin batteries that's doing the memory while the thing's powered off? So those would be the 2 things to check.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, one thing I would add is make sure that all your devices and all your channels, both transmit and receive, are named before you do any subscriptions, or before you set any subscriptions. Because once the device falls out of the network, like if it's powered off, it will not recall where it should be getting and transmitting signals to and from.
All right. And now we are changing subjects to surround. And for our panel, go ahead, and if you have things you want to say before we get started, go ahead and start raising your hand. And I think that we're working on. We have some testing that we're going to do in 5.1 in YouTube Live, and so we're going to be testing that over the next couple weeks. We're working on getting the infrastructure put together. And so you're going to start to see those tests. And I thought that it might be good for us to kind of talk a little bit about why we're doing that and what it means and how it, why we're doing something that nobody else is doing. And I think that one of the things that I really do, I've been working in surround now or immersive for about the last 2 years. And before that, just testing it for the last, 3 or 4 years before that. And I really think that the difference between mono, the difference between mono and stereo is about 1/10 in my eyes, the difference between stereo and surround, and so in its most basic form, 5.1, surround is, you just start to feel something different because you can hear things. And the issue that I find is that things just sound a lot less muddy, and mentally I can start to see those things. And so, or I can start hearing them, and I can start creating a space, inside of that. And I think that those are the things that'll be, that are, pretty interesting. And I think that the reason we want to put it in the show is because we want to experiment with it. It's very hard to just do 5.1, like, I'm just going to do 5.1. It's not like stereo, spread it a little bit. 5.1 is a thing. And you have, and 5.1.4 and 7.1.4 and Atmos and all the other things, you have to learn how they sound and how they affect the listener. And you have to do it all the time. Practice is a big piece of it. And so anyway, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to say, can you share why surround sound is important for those people who are new to office hours or watching this program for the first time? And the reason why I'm asking is because I think it's important for people to have, I understand it, I enjoy it, but why is it important for people who might be listening to know about it? Apologize for my wife working.
Yeah, I will let Jeff take a swing at that.
Well, my why is music based.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I can answer Tony's questions
go ahead.
about
absolutely
office hours.
No, answer it, yeah.
I've been playing around with it for years and a lot more in the last couple of weeks. And it's just, it's great fun. It's actually, I find in many ways, mixing is simpler. It's a lot harder to fit a dense mix into stereo than it is when you have room to spread it out. And it does give you ability to immerse a listener in a soundscape.
Yeah.
Some basics that for anyone who doesn't know, we throw out these numbers, 5.1, 7.1, 7.1.4. The 0.1 originally is for the LFE, and let's also make the definition between an LFE and a subwoofer. So LFE is low frequency effects, and that is a track, that is a storage. A subwoofer is a speaker that plays low frequencies, sometimes the low frequencies from the LFE, and it also supports low frequencies from the other channels. So every channel in a surround system, spatial audio, Atmos, all of them are full range except for the LFE tracks, meaning they can go from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz just fine. So the LFE track is for effects, Godzilla's footsteps, explosions, those sorts of things, and however else you might want to use it. But you don't need it for bass. And originally it was a fraction of the bandwidth. So rather than going 20,000 cycles, it went up to 200, which is 0.01, but people just fudged it and said 0.1. It's a tenth of the bandwidth. And now we got this 5.1. And now the point just becomes a delimiter between channels in the horizontal plane. So we have 5 channels in the horizontal plane or 7 channels in the horizontal plane. That's the first number. Period. The next number is the number of subwoofers that we have, or LFE tracks. And then the next period is the number of height channels or ceiling speakers. So 7.1.4 would be 7 channels in the horizontal plane, 1 LFE track, and 4 channels in the ceiling, or 4 speakers in the ceiling. But there's sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, go ahead, finish.
So when we throw out those numbers, that kind of defines both a transmission format, a storage format, so we can store 5.1 channels, and it also becomes a playback format. How many speakers do you actually have in your listening environment? And Atmos is the separation between the two of those that kind of makes you don't have to have exactly the same number of speakers that the person that created the stream had. So you don't have to have 5.1 speakers to listen to an Atmos stream. It will do its best job in whatever speaker setup you have.
Yeah, and to get back to office hours, I think that we want to play with it, and because no one's done a lot of spoken word in 5.1. And, one of the things you'll see us start to experiment with is the end credits, and the countdown clock on the front will be us just really going for it. Just kind of figuring out things that we can do around you and so on and so forth. So if you come on and turn it on, that 5 minutes will be a real experiment. For one of the things we want to play with is the idea of separating out the speakers. So when you see a super source, I want you to hear one person a little over to one side and another person a little over to the other. I'm not going crazy, but playing with that. We may play with some effects that are, in the surround speakers during the show as well. And so there's a lot of things that, and again, because you're doing it every day, there's a lot of things we can get really good at and experiment with in a way that would be, it's just really hard, and some of it will work and some of it won't. The interesting thing is we'll probably do a situation where the surround speakers are kind of an experiment for us. The stereo version of the show will probably not have we probably won't fold the surrounds in. We'll just kind of, because we'll be experimenting with those. So we won't fold the surrounds in. We'll just mix the front to the front. But the surrounds during the show will be a real experiment. Like I might whisper in your ear, I have a button here that I can push a second channel, and I can be like, Mitchell is crazy. Like while he's talking, and it'll just be over here, but only the people with surround will get to hear it. So anyway, it'll just be kind of a fun. It could be kind of fun. Anyway, go ahead, Mitchell.
I just wanted to remind you, Alex, that I'm reserving the left rear channel 4 for me.
Yeah.
Office hours, and you can go over to 5 if you want to.
Mitchell and I, we've been talking about it. We may actually get into arguments in the surround speakers, sidebar while everybody else is talking, which we think would be kind of fun. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I now I understand the experimental nature of the project of bringing 5.1 to a podcast like this, because we take, here on Office Hours, we take great care in making sure everyone's microphone is the right level and the right distance and the minimum background sounds are there, and that we have a nice, clean, environmental-free audio track, and everyone is, normalized and brought in at the same level. So I'm wondering why 5.1? Am I going to have to put an ambisonic microphone out on my porch here to capture the garbage trucks on Friday so that we can have them in the surrounds?
The main thing is that we so when we eventually we're going to we'll get Todd on, and Todd will play music for us that's in 5.1, and it will be, he's going to transport it to us in 5.1. We're going to put it into the mix, and you're going to listen to Todd play live in 5.1. Us doing that for one day is really hard. Us doing that every day, where the pipeline is all built, we all know how it works, we all know how it goes. So if we want to add a music artist, and then the other thing is that I will tell you from experiments that I've done in the past, when we're covering something like IBC, if we did do, a set of microphones at IBC, it changes how it feels completely. So you have a live view sitting there and they're talking and everything else. We've got a couple mics pulling into surround. You will feel like you're there much more than you do now. So for day to day, probably it won't make that much of a difference, and we'll be goofy with it and play around with it a little bit. But what we're doing is building a pipeline that means that this is muscle memory. This gets into we want to build something that 5.1 is nothing to us. And now if we want to add an artist, if we want to add an event that does make it a difference, the entire pipeline is built for that, and we do it every day, and it's not a big deal. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I understand for the musical portions that we do, which are few and far between, and I appreciate that.
Currently. They might be like every 2 to 4 times a month.
That most people who listen to this on a daily basis are monitoring on a lot of times on a home assistant, which is mixed down to a mono signal, or on a radio, or a laptop device, which doesn't really have good 5.1 separation and so on. And so my fear is, and half the time when I'm watching TV with 5.1 turned on, the matrix gets screwed up somewhere along the line, and I'll lose the center channel, or I'll lose, and it becomes the dialogue becomes unintelligible, and the sound effects overwhelming.
And it's not just a Christopher Nolan film?
Well, no. It's a lot of times it's the matrix is screwed up on one end or the other. Somebody has got one channel out of phase going into the matrix or something, and it decodes wacky, and it suppresses one of the channels. So I worry about how it's going to collapse down for the regular listeners. Yeah.
You shouldn't worry, because this is what we're going to figure out, is how to do this. And what we're going to do is there will be two streams. So there's going to be the R&D stream, and there's going to be the mainstream. The mainstream will be standard dynamic range, 1080p, stereo, and it will be mixed properly for that. And so for everybody watching Office Hours on a day-to-day basis, we will let people know that there's the R&D stream, and the R&D stream will be 4K, HDR10, 5.1. So that's, there'll be a R&D stream that goes out that's much higher much higher level, and then there'll be the regular stream. So the regular stream will look the same to everybody as it does right now, and it'll sound the same. The R&D stream will be much higher quality, and someday maybe we'll fold the two of them together, but we're not going to do that at the beginning. To your point, it has less to do with our ability and more for us to be able to build a manifest that it properly tells the app, all the AVRs what to do. It's something we'll be learning and figuring out. So the R&D stream, this is why no one's doing this. So that's why we're going to do it. And so we're going to slowly work out all the issues and become experts at it. And then when we want to do it, it's not a big lift. And hopefully it affects a lot of other people doing production, because I think that there is a possibility of doing some pretty interesting things. Go ahead, Todd.
I wanted to harken back to Tony's original question, just because going from mono to stereo is a really exciting thing when you first do it. When you first just hear the space that gets created in stereo. Next thing you do is when you put headphones on, and you put a good pair of headphones on in stereo, and you hear stuff differently. You feel it's more real, and it just keeps on going from there. And I don't do concerts anymore in stereo if I can help it. If somebody hires me to do a concert, I ask to be on the inside with the audience around me, with 4 speakers around me. Could be 8, could be 16, could be 21, whatever the budget is. But the idea of being able to direct things and immerse the audience in an experience of audio musically, this is why it's important. When you go then to Alex's desire to not only experiment, but essentially build a technology or a manifest, as you just said, Alex, or just, how a way of doing things. This is something new to be using this inside of a stream live. I'm terribly excited about it just for that. What does it accomplish? I think that kind of has yet to be seen. We know what it accomplishes in a movie scenario. And I'll just share this one with you really quickly, Alex. I think you'll enjoy this. Quick story. In 2013, I was honored to be a fellow at the Sundance documentary film labs. So they took us all out to Skywalker Sound. And one of the first things that we did on the evening that we arrived is we went into the George Lucas's screening room. And you know which one I'm talking about, Alex, at the end of the road.
Stag.
Yeah, the Stag, right.
Is it the Stag in the tech building or the little one in the main house? Was it?
No,
were you
no, it's not in the main house. It's in the
tech building.
Yeah. And it's pretty large. And they showed us a little clip from Star Trek. And as you probably know, all the sound design for those movies is done at Skywalker. Yeah. And when I first heard, this was a 47 speaker Atmos system. Then is what it was. And when I heard the ship go from not only here, from the back right to the left, but go down, it really made a difference to me. And I kind of didn't want to do stereo concerts anymore at that point.
The turning point for me, and then we'll get into everybody's questions here, was I was in a theater in the South Bay that has over 180 speakers. It's a constellation system. It's a Meyer constellation system. 180 speakers or something in that vicinity. And they played a bird and they had this tablet, and he could just move the bird around, and it just sounded. I mean, it sounded like there was a bird in the theater. Like you couldn't distinguish it from the real thing, and it was all going around us. And then what I think is really interesting is when you stimulate the brain from from what it perceives as different directions, it starts to build a room. So your brain, when it hears something back behind it, it starts to build that, like, I have to now pay attention to that. I have to pay attention to this. I have to pay attention. And what happens is you end up building this theater that you're watching. I was in a surround mix stage in LA, and for 5 minutes, there was no vocals for the song. And there's all this stuff going on around you. And when the singer walks up and starts singing, I had never had the feeling of a person being so present right in front of me ever watching anything. And I asked the person who was doing the mix, and he said, well, it's because we built a space that was really big and then put somebody in it, and there he was coming just straight down the center speaker. And so that's the kind of stuff that we want to figure out. And we may, for instance, play with reverb, so that there's just a little bit of surround reverb. There's a little bit of something there. We may play with atmospherics, and we're basically going to let anybody here who, Mickey and other folks, we're going to let you all loose on it. And, for the experimental stream. And we're going to let people know in the experimental stream that it's experimental. It's like we don't, this is the stream where we're going to kind of, play with it and figure it out. And if you want to play along now, that's definitely why, we're going down that path. And I think that there's very few opportunities to play this experimental and this hard, in this area right now, where you're doing something for public. We're going to have hundreds or more listening to it, giving us feedback, and no one usually has a lab like that, and that's why we think that I think it can be. And I think that with Apple's investment, with everything else that's happening, spatial is coming. Spatial audio is going to keep on getting bigger. It's not going to get smaller, and I think that it's an opportunity for our group to be on the front end of that, that process. Todd, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I was just going to just lightly refer back to the idea of, do we all need speakers? Do we all need an Atmos system? Do we all need to buy new TVs? No, but boy, and Mickey can maybe, I hope, speak to this, because even having worked in immersive audio all this time, I still do not quite, or Jeff actually too, I want to talk to you, Jeff, about this. I still do not understand the specifics of mixing 5.1 and so on down into a binaural mix in headphones, because it's like headphones is how people can really enjoy the most our stream when we start messing about with it. Right. The question is, how does that work? In the beginning for this test, it won't work on headphones. It'll only work on a TV AVR that can see,
that's getting from like a Chromecast or Apple TV. It's very limited in what it can do, because there's not many people that can do it right now. So it's going to be very limited in what it can do. Obviously, we're the sharp end of the stick of figuring out how it works before it's more widely available than other devices. So
my question is, Alex, then with the 5.1 streaming, I just answered my own question. Never mind. I withdraw. Bye.
Next question.
And it's from Michael Forrest in London, UK. My friend Sefi has been trying to create a surround sound audio library for years. Looks like he's on his way to launching Sphere Tracks. What do you people think?
And I think that we might have, I don't know if anyone was able to listen to it before we got into the show. So I think that I haven't been able to see it. But I do think that the interesting thing to get to the question a little bit, I haven't been able to hear it, and hopefully it's good. There is an entirely new set of stock audio opportunity that doesn't exist right now because of surround. That as surround builds, if you think about, this is another thing that we'll play with, is how do we experiment with surround, and how do we record for it, and how do we go out there? And the key thing is that when we talk about surround and eventually HDR, there'll be a segment of our viewers who are really serious about this that can actually hear it. Like literally we will have the first online classes on HDR and surround where you actually can hear it. Like you can, if you're on the show, you can actually, when we say, okay, this is going to go around you, and you'll actually spirit go around you. So I don't think that I've seen that anywhere else. So those are the kind of things we'll be able to talk about. But I think that there is an opportunity to go out and record a lot of this stuff. There are people who have recorded lots of immersive audio, but I haven't seen a lot of it on stock agencies yet. So I think there's going to be some opportunities as people build it up. And again, the easiest way to predict the future is to create it. And so if we start having hundreds of us trying to figure this out, it could move things along as well. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle. I can't build my house around my surround sound system. Nevertheless, what are the best room dimensions? Narrow, wide, or square?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Not square. Square is always a bad option for sound because of standing waves are doubled up when the two dimensions are the same. So you want the three dimensions of the room to be different. Generally, you should be seated with the longest dimension front to back, as long as the narrow dimension, the width dimension is not too narrow. So Dolby does have some minimum and some sort of desired specs for room size. Trying to remember what those are. Notes I had for optimal was like 21 feet long by 18 feet wide by 10 feet high, and that's for a music mix room. So that's not necessarily a listening room, but there you get an idea. Rectangular room, not low ceilings, not the same dimension in the three length, width, and height.
Good, Karl.
So there is actually a ratio. The golden ratio works for this quite well in cinemas. So more expensive cinemas will actually set out their floor plan. So this actually, the floor would be a golden ratio, and the screen, the wall that the screen is on, is also a golden ratio to the floor. The sides don't matter because they usually ramp up. So they actually technically aren't a rectangle as you go from front to back on the sidewalls. And the ceiling is usually tapered as well, so that's not usually a problem. So I know that the Abbey Road Film Mix Studio is golden ratio, and I think one of the sound stages at Skywalker Sound is also a golden ratio. I know they've got like 6 stages there, but I think one of them, their mix stage, I think, is a golden ratio as well. So it's kind of a known thing. You are going to make the room dead. So usually listening rooms are quite dead for cinema. They're not quite live, like they can be sometimes for music, control rooms. So it's going to be quite a dead room. The reason why is because you're going to, as Alex said, if you want to hear the bird going around, you don't want to hear the bird bouncing off the wall the opposite side. So that's kind of why you need to have a relatively dead room. So most cinemas have 6-inch padding along both sides of the walls and the ceiling and everything. But for the home, rectangle room is good, and soft furnishings and big curtains, big thick curtains will help too.
Yeah, and I've had the opportunity to sit in a pretty high-end home-like room, and the way that's set up, it is it's, I don't know if it's the golden ratio, but it's definitely not even. The other thing that they did is they floated the room, so the room has a 6-inch gap to the outside world. It's got a door that's about 3 inches thick, that totally seals with I believe 3 panes of glass, in it. The walls where the studs are that come inside of that, remember it's floated, and then on the inside, if you think of the stud here and a stud here, it has fabric that goes across the front, so you have to be very careful leaning anything up against the wall. And then it has diffusion, behind that fabric that sits behind that, and it's a pretty dead room. And it looks really nice because that diffusion's hidden behind the fabric, and it works exceptionally well. They spent a lot of money on it. Next question.
Eric Antonio from Washington, D.C. Does the panel have recommendations for reference level true surround headphones?
Go ahead, Mickey.
No. Alternatively, though, I would recommend monitoring through a binaural re-render if the format that you're mixing in supports binaural re-renders.
Go ahead, Karl.
So Dolby on their own website does have a list of headphones that they say support Dolby Atmos. So, but understand that they're designed more for gaming. They are gaming-focused Dolby Atmos. They're not. It kind of depends, because like when we talk about surround, we've got like the Apple surround, so right. That's a different kind of surround to converting 5.1 to binaural. As Mickey said, that's another way of doing it, which you can just use any high-quality headphone to that because it's just 2 channels, and it's actually the mix that's important rather than the headphones. So be careful of what says like Atmos ready or Atmos enabled. What that means is they can essentially take the stream from a game and put it through. Yeah, that's one of the reasons.
So the tricky thing about the Dolby enabled headphones is they come with a code that unlocks Dolby on a Windows machine. Like that's the big thing for the headphones. Like other than that, all the headphones work. But the code is important because Microsoft was too cheap to buy the license for all the Windows. Like Apple just has everything is Atmos. Microsoft doesn't want to pay for that license, and so what happens is that the headphones come with that license. They license it, and then you put the little code in, and then then it'll enable it on the Windows machine. On the Mac, it doesn't matter because it's already enabled. Go ahead, Mickey.
I think it's important to differentiate with the Dolby Atmos stuff that you need to differentiate the content creation part of things and the consumption part of things. The consumer side, which is the Dolby headphones that Karl mentioned, the AirPods, all those Atmos capable headphones are only able to take in an encoded signal. So a signal that is already encoded in EAC3 or AC4. You cannot create content on those. Aside from the Apple monitoring that they integrated in with Logic, though with that as well, the Apple special sauce binaural re-render will not translate to other systems, only Apple systems, because Apple has their own way of decoding the binaural render.
Yeah, and one thing that's really important to think about as you think about surround, and we don't have to worry about it too much today, but we'll talk about it another time, but that you have to kind of think also about the space that you're in. The physics of all that sound changes every time you shift up. So your headphones will sound a certain way. You can do a binaural render, and even with a simulator, they're going to sound a certain level, and you're going to mix to that. It may not work in a room. You have to listen to it in a what we would call a near field room. So a near field room is going to be a larger room with speakers, and that's going to sound a certain way, and you're going to make a mix there. But that mix will not work in a theater. So a theater has its own physics, and what happens is that the audio falls off much faster. So things that sound perfectly fine inside of a near field will sound very stark inside of a theater. And so you really have to sit in a theater and mix. Currently, I don't know if it'll always be this way, but currently Office Hours actually has access to a theater that we can mix in. We can literally drop a mixer into, and we may try to play with mixing the show in the theater just for fun. So we'll see how that goes. Next question.
James Fosline in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Would it be important to mix surround with matching speakers?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Ideally, yes. Ideally, all of your speakers, the 7 horizontal channels and the 4 ceiling channels, which is the minimum for an Atmos music suite, should all be exactly the same model. If not that, because you do have physical limitations, they should be the same brand from the same line, so the voicing of the speakers is the same. Beyond that, you could probably get away with using different brand speakers in surrounds and ceiling, as long as you have the capability to do some EQ to make the speakers match in your monitor processor.
Good, Karl.
So this is something that's come up quite recently, this whole discussion. Sonic State is another podcast that talks about this with some of the participants there have actually converted their studio. So the rule of thumb at the moment, is that music that's done in surround sound, they generally want matched speakers. Now with movies, it's completely different. So the way movies is done, generally it's matched drivers, not matched speakers. So what matched drivers means is your tweeter, mid-range, and your woofer will be the same, but your front centers maybe have 2, maybe have 6 of those woofers, whereas the ones on the sides may have single or 2. So 2 woofers versus 6 at the front. So they'll have the same drivers, but they'll have different cabinets and a different amount of driver ratios. So you'll always have the same amount of tweeters, which is 1 generally. But this is something like you will see it at Abbey Road Film Mix Studio. So they have, I think B&W speakers, which all have the same drivers but have different cabinets depending if it's a front, left, front, right, center, or surround. And I think the mix stage at Skywalker Sound has the same setup as well. They have different cabinets but same drivers in their surround speakers versus their front, center, left speakers. Subwoofers are completely different, of course, but generally from the same manufacturer. But yeah, in music, we are hearing that this could change, but in music, people are liking to match. So like having to have 7 of the exact same speakers all the way around, or, if they're going to have 4 above, they're going to get all these kind of mid-field monitors or near-field monitors. But this is kind of people making it up as they go. The industry is kind of going, what works best for me? Which is kind of cool.
Which is what's exciting about us getting into it now. Is before, it's before it's all the concrete's been poured. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, one thing specifically for theatrical is you can't really have your 15-foot stack of LCRs placed all throughout your surrounds and also as your height channels. So you would typically have different model surrounds and height channel speakers for theatrical. But for theatrical, you are required to have full range speakers all around. Now, you can also use bass managed speakers that are specifically bass managed for your surrounds. So your left wall, right wall, left rear, right rear, and also for your height channels. But they need to be full range for theatrical.
Next question.
And it's from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Waveforms make great visualizations. Is there some way to generate a 3D visualization for surround sound?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, if you are mixing or are able to output a channel-based feed of your mix, then you can bring it into something like Thalok does this a lot with Isadora, wherein he takes multiple channels coming in. He can visualize it based on modulation or on frequency spectrum. And you can do a lot with that. Should be fun.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the problem with 3D visualization is that, unlike sound, you can only see in one direction at a time, and you're not used to seeing stuff behind you. So how you would relate positional information, like a sound coming from back right, to a 3D visualization in front of you would be hard. Maybe you could do it with VR glasses so that if you turn around, you could see something, see a visualization back there that is represented by a sound that's in the back right speaker. That would be the only way I think that you could actually tie the 3D space of the visualization to the 3D space of the surround sound.
Yeah, absolutely. And but do believe that there is, a lot of this when you're doing surround, especially when you're working with objects, there is metadata that's saying this is where this is, right? This is where this object is. And, there's some of us have been thinking about the fact that you probably parse that and send it into all kinds of things. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, for someone mixing music non-theatrical content in surround for the first time, what would be the best way to learn?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I seem to always go back to this, but I'd like to say listen to music that has been mixed in surround, and also compared to its stereo counterpart. See what has been done there. Listen and learn through your ears, because that's the tool you're going to end up using anyway.
Yeah, go Jeff.
So you can, if you don't have a surround sound speaker system, you can do this on headphones. As Mickey was saying, Logic has a headphone binaural rendering system. So if you have access to Logic Pro, you can work in there and just begin to remix some of your tracks and kind of play with what that sounds like. The other thing is if you work in something like Pro Tools, Dolby has a 90-day license on the Atmos production suite, a 90-day trial. And you could get into that. That's going to get a little more complicated as far as the entry-level basic way to learn. So start with that and begin to play. If you have access to 5 speakers, set up a surround system and just play.
Yeah. Karl?
Yeah, so Jeff said it. So yeah, Logic. So read the manual for the surround sound that's been put into Logic, that much stuff. Learn how it works so you can get the best out of that tool, and then do A/B comparisons, as Mickey said. So do a stereo mix and a surround mix and actually hear the difference. And that tells you maybe where you're missing, where it sounds hollow. Maybe there's something missing in your surround mix. So yeah, A/B comparison as well is helpful.
And keep the questions coming. First Tuesday of every month, we're going to be talking about surround. So we'll probably have someone come in and talk about Logic. We'll have other things. If you have suggestions, also put them in the second hour. But we're going to keep on paying a lot of attention to what we're doing here. So, so think about those, play with those. We will do another. I think we did a very quick, like it just got released in Logic. Let's try it. When Logic first came out with some of the new tools. But now that they've matured a little bit, things have been updated, we're going to do that again potentially in the next month or two. So stay tuned for that. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. What is the basic setup of surround for someone new to surround?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So 5.1, the 5 horizontal channels are left, center, right, left, right being the standard stereo. So they form an equilateral triangle, 60-degree angle. So the left speaker is 30 degrees to the left of center, and the right speaker is 30 degrees to the right of center. And then the 2 surrounds, LS and RS, left surround, right surround, are at 110 degrees left and right. And then the .1 is the subwoofer. Again, it's an LFE track. Usually the subwoofer speaker actually helps out with what Mickey said is bass management. So if your speakers are small and can't do all the way down to 20 hertz, your subwoofer will help out the other 5 speakers. And that's all done in the monitor setup. As you're setting up your room, you want all those speakers to be equidistant from the listening position. I gave you the angles. The distances should all be the same from the listening position. And then the subwoofer should be placed to get the most even bass due to the room modes in your room. One way you can do this is actually put the subwoofer in your listening position and play pink noise through it, and then wander around your room and listen for where the bass is the most even, and then put the subwoofer there, because it will excite the room modes the same way.
Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, for a very a simple set it and forget it kind of listening system, like home theater system, I've listened to the Sonos Arc. It's a little too it's a little too emphasized on the low end for my taste, but it's pretty decent for the price and very, very easy to set up.
And I will say, this is probably not to get started, but I listened to a demo at someone's house actually of the Sony, and I wouldn't mix with this. I just want to point out when we're talking about, like, as we start to think about those, not the Sony, but the Sennheiser Ambio soundbar, it's magical. Like, I don't even understand how it works. Like, it runs a bunch of signals to figure out what the sound is like, and then it starts playing, and you cannot just, I can't believe it works. That's all I have to say. So if you're thinking about something that you want to have at home, if I told unless you're really going into all the speakers, now it's $2,500. It's not a free thing, but it's like, instead of buying all these speakers and trying to figure out where to install them and everything else, it's solid 85 to 90% of all the speakers you'd put into a normal house would be covered with that bar. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. Anyone with a hearing disability is going to have issues hearing surround. How can this be countered without having to make 2 versions?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Considering the down mix in the mix situation. So when we've mixed stereo, we've always had to consider how it would fold down to mono. Now that we're making multi-channel versions, we have to consider how it will fold down to stereo and to mono.
And what happens, where we will go eventually, we can't do this right now, but where we will go eventually is if your device is connected to, the Apple TV, for instance, knows it's connected to an AVR and it knows what the AVR is able to do. And it says, oh, I'm only getting, or whatever it's outputting to, it goes, oh, that can only handle stereo. Eventually in our stack, we'll say, well, we'll give you stereo for that. Right now, we're going to have 2 versions. There'll be 2 versions to go, because one version is 4K, it's HDR, it's 5.1, it's crazy. Because there's all kinds of crazy things going on over there. And I don't want to make people who have been watching this show and just want the information to have to deal with that until we're happy with it. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle. Is there a decent 5.1 system to be found for less than an Alex? I think that's $10,000, or am I dreaming?
No, $11,000 is a Charles. Is $11,000. I think $3,200 is a Mickey, and I'm a mere $700. So go ahead, Karl.
So there's one by Yamaha. So Yamaha actually do make decent speakers, and they also make decent receivers, which is kind of cool. The Yamaha one, so you're asking for for around an Alex. So it'll be a good start. Subwoofer, match speakers, the center speakers is of course tilted horizontally. This would be a good start. It comes with everything you kind of need in a box. That's why they call it home theater in a box. You just need to provide your Blu-ray player or your Apple TV and plug it in. Off you go. This would be a good start if you're looking at around an Alex. So Yamaha's a good brand. They've been in this game for a hell of a long time as well.
Good, Courtney.
And I found as far as economical methods of listening to 5.1 is sound bars. Vizio V-Series home theater sound bar, which have a single driver across the front, and they'll have two satellite speakers for the rear, and then they'll have a Bluetooth connected subwoofer. They actually sound pretty decent, and I'm really surprised that when you listen to them that the 5.1 sounds pretty decent on something as cheap as a $250 soundbar system.
Yeah. Next question.
Tony Mobley from Noonan, Georgia. Are the Apple AirPods Pro a solution for us at our office hours workspace?
When we do some tests, you'll be able to hear the app inside of the AirPods Pro. You'll be able to hear some pieces of that. For the live, it'll only work on the TV execution when we get started. But we hope to expand as we keep going. I'm kind of curious. We're working on. Wansi Robles is working on an app that people will be able to get to play with soon, and it'll be interesting if we can switch it so that you can listen to it in both modes eventually. Next question.
Wansi Robles in Mexico City, Mexico. Will it be interesting testing behind the scenes and surround frontal channels for the show and show calling as such in the other channels?
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I can definitely set that up for one of the what are we calling it? Experimental days.
Yep.
And yeah, interestingly, like during some of the remote productions that I work on, I do throw comms in my rears, so I'm kind of used to that already.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of stuff we're going to experiment with, of just hearing comms, hearing other things. Imagine, like, one of the things that I've been thinking about is that when we've had stuff with Marcia, where she's cutting a show for us and cutting a concert. So imagine listening to the concert. And maybe the concert might be in stereo, but you're hearing Marcia's calling the show off in one corner, so you can kind of. And I think that the other thing that we're going to play with is interpretation. So hearing an interpreter over your right shoulder, so that you're watching something in one language and hearing the other language in the other in one of the surround speakers. I think that's where we want to start getting innovative, where we haven't seen anybody do that in broadcast. And there'll be things that we find that don't work at all, and things that we find that are great. And the only way to find them is to do them. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA. I'm currently using a pair of Yamaha HS5 monitors. Would it make sense to acquire an additional pair of HS5s for rear channels and an appropriate center speaker to listen to 5.1 audio?
Go ahead, Karl.
Yep. So this is actually poor man's way of doing 5.1 right now if you're in a studio. So the HS5s with the HS8S sub that Yamaha makes, they're $200 a pop for the HS5s. You can just buy 5 of them with your center channel, just turn it sideways, make sure the tweet is pointed at you. This is quite a common one for people who, in like your situation where you may just be at home, you just want to get into it. It's $1,000 for the speakers, and I think the subwoofer's $500. The subwoofer's a matched driver to these speakers. They're technically not full range because they're the HS5s. You have to get HS8s to get closer to the full range, but they're quite beefy and a little bit more expensive, of course. But this is actually one of the biggest ones people are going to, because it's near field monitors, so they are going to be pretty close. So I remember Alex's Cage system. HS5s would have been great for that. HS6s, HS7s, HS8s, But yes, this is exactly what you want to do. Then you just get a audio interface that has at least maybe 8 channel out, and then in your software in your computer, you just tell which channel to be which speaker, and then your software handles the rest.
Good, Mickey.
I would recommend using your current HS5s as your surround channels, and then getting HS8s for your LCRs. that would it's more of a buy once cry once thing, because once you want to upgrade from your 5 HS5s, that's 5 speakers you have to replace, as opposed to just replacing the 2 surrounds that you have.
That's such a nice way of saying eventually you're going to get tired of the HS5.
Yeah.
You want to go to the HS8, so just go ahead and just bite the bullet first. And when you said LCR, you mean left, right, center, so or left, center, right. So just go ahead and get the new speakers as the ones that Mickey says you'll eventually want to have all the way around. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, IMAX Live mentions immersive sound as a unique selling point of experience a live event in an IMAX theater. The Allen & Heath D-Live can mix in 5.1. But what live consoles mix engines could go beyond 5.1?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, you would most likely lean towards more towards the consoles that are designed for broadcast, like the SSLs that are designed for broadcast. Lavo, Calrec, those are capable of. They have boards that go all the way up to Atmos.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, and there's a lot of things that can pan inside of 5.1, and there's things, even the QL1 has some 5.1 features or surround features that you can kind of pan through those, and so those are there. Yeah, definitely, the Calrecs have more there, and then a lot of people will end up using some kind of live out to software. So one of the things that we're going to be experimenting with is the Elisa from L Acoustics, the studio there, that we're going to pass through it. But there are other productions that are passing it through Pro Tools. I mean, that Pro Tools is probably the most popular as far as a software solution for surround, so that they're passing it through there. It's not really what Pro Tools is designed for. When I talk to live engineers, they're like, "Oh, that's a bad idea." So they're like that. I don't think this is a good idea, not for a live event. And I will admit that Pro Tools can thump out. I mean, we've definitely had in tests, everything's working, and suddenly it just drops for a second as it figures something out. It's not the live experience. It's not built. What they did is they took something so that you can listen to it while you're working, and they said, "Well, we'll just broadcast that." And so you're asking the Pro Tools to do something that it's not built for. So that's the only thing you have to kind of be accountable for. But so we definitely see things where it just dumps. It dumps for a second, or sometimes more than a second. And so and that's the thing that we worry about for live shows. Next question.
Aaron Gencarelli from Flagstaff, Arizona. What equipment are you using to create the surround sound for the show? Also, how are the remote operators controlling that equipment?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, as Alex mentioned earlier, we're looking at the Elisa Studio. I would much prefer the hardware Elisa than the software version for
and
processing.
There's about a $20,000 delta between the two. So anyway, go ahead, Mickey.
We can do it. I know. And yeah, in terms of controlling remotely, Elisa can be controlled by via OSC. So we can set up queues in QLab, or I can send OSC from here locally out to a machine at 3210.
And Mickey's already done a fair bit of mixing shows for us, where he's in Manila and we're doing stuff at 3210, and he's listening to it and making the adjustments, and it's been pretty successful. Next question. Oh, go ahead,
Kevin,
Todd, real quick.
Okay.
Did you have
I just had a question. Can somebody spell Elisa for me? Because I'm looking for it.
L-ISA.
Lisa.
Yeah.
Okay, that I knew about.
Yeah. So that's the from L Acoustics, and so we're taking a look at that. There's a couple of them, and again, my goal is that not that we're going to use one mixing solution. It's that we're going to use, we're going to get one working, but we'll go, okay, now we're going to try to mix the show in this, and now we're going to try to mix the show in this, because our goal is that we really understand what makes one better than the other, or what we prefer. And I'm hoping that this really becomes this, along with HDR, along with, we're really pushing the outer envelope of what you can do in broadcast, just because we can. Now, next question.
All right, it's from Kevin, and Alex, I'll need help with his last name. Sorry, Kevin.
I would say Musagamfura.
Much better than I would have done it. He's from Kigali, Rwanda, And the question is, Apple computers have a software called Audio MIDI Setup that you can set up a 5.1 sound output with an audio interface with multiple channel outputs. Can this produce a correct surround sound system when you connect the interface to multiple speakers?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, it can. It actually allows you to assign your individual outputs to the speakers, and it will go beyond 5.1 to 7.1. When you go to 7, the 6th and 7th speakers can either be rear or sides. That's a choice. There's actually a third version, which is SDDS, Sony Dynamic Digital Sound, I think that stands for, that adds a left center and a right center. So you have 5 channels across the front. Mickey's blessing himself over SDDS. I had the T-shirt in the day. Their logo was great. I don't know about their sound.
Go ahead, Karl. Go ahead.
When you use the Apple MIDI setup, that works great. One caveat, Apple will play spatial out of their music app through your surround sound system, but it will only support 5.1, not 7.1 yet.
Got it. Karl?
Yeah, so the audio MIDI setup app, essentially what it is, it's essentially a handshake between software. So it does require like Apple Music or Logic or something that actually knows, or even DVD player back in the day. So if you still have DVD drive in there, it'll actually spit out the AEC3 format and pump it out. So essentially what it's doing is you're telling the computer which speaker is left, which as Jeff said, 5.1, 7.1, and the software is the one that's going to send it, and the audio MIDI setup will take that AC3 file and then decode it back to essentially like a wave format for each channel, and then it'll output it to that, because that's not how surround is usually transmitted. It's usually transmitted in a format that's AC3 or something similar. Whereas once you go through AC3, and this is kind of something that you'll see a lot of when you go out as fiber. So when you go out optical can't handle AC3 bit stream generally. It doesn't like it. When you go up to higher bit rates like Dolby Atmos, can't go through fiber or optical or Toslink. So it actually converts it to PCM in 6 channels or 8 channels. This is something the PlayStation had to do as well. PlayStation had to do that as well back in the day. But yeah, so you're assigning which speaker in your room or coming out of your audio interface is which speaker and then the software handles the rest essentially.
Next question.
David Brady, New York, New York. I have a Gen 1 B&W Panorama soundbar, and for small New York City apartment living, it's more than adequate. If the Atmos enabled Gen 3 worth it?
Go ahead, Karl.
I would suggest the Sennheiser Ambio Alex talked about. I have seen that demonstrated to me in a pretty good room, and yes, as Alex said, it's like magic.
It is. I will say that. I mean, if you have the soundbar, I bet you it sounds great. It's a Bowers and Wilkins is going to be a solid sound bar. It's going to sound good. And I think that it would be worth keeping. But the Ambio is the next step up. Next question.
Next question from James Babbitt in San Diego, California. Can surround sound use spatial audio, or are they separate topics?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Spatial audio is this term that
Marketing
Apple made up that is all-encompassing of everything, of all surround formats. In the grand scheme of things, it's an Apple term, not really used in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that Apple defines it that way, and partially because they do a lot of things that aren't Atmos or aren't something else. They basically parse all your audio, even if it's just stereo, and try to spatialize it and try to put things in different places and everything else. So they have a lot of processing that they're doing, so that it's funny because it kind of blends between. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference between some stereo tracks and their Atmos counterparts, because Apple's done so much to the stereo track that it's not the pure stereo track that you remembered if it's in a spatial mode. Go ahead, Karl.
Yeah, so I shake my fist at the sky when Apple named 2 products the same thing at the same time. So there's 2 different spatial audio or spatial sound that you get. So there's one which is essentially Apple's flavor, as Mickey said, of Atmos. So this Apple Music and spatial audio, that's essentially surround sound like 5.1, 7.1 Atmos. But then they've also got a wholly different product called spatial audio in their AirPod Pros and AirPod Max. And what this does, this will just take a 5.1, and when you turn your head, the center channel stays in one spot. So they also call that spatial audio. And that is a completely different product doing a completely different thing, but it does use surround sound format coming in, but it's designed to work with your iPhone. So if you're watching him, if you're watching The Mandalorian on your iPhone and you turn your head, the sound from Grogu is still coming from the screen. It's not actually coming from wherever your head's pointing. So Apple also calls that spatial audio. It's completely different technology, but the two do obviously work together because you can put in spatial audio music into AirPod Maxes and you can actually turn on spatial mode in the headphones. And when you turn your head, the singer will stay, relative to wherever you are because it has accelerometers in your headphones. But it is crazy that Apple called two things spatial audio.
I have to admit that the turning my head inside of it and having it actually turn drives me absolutely crazy. Like I just don't want that at all. Like I don't like I just want to listen to the music the way it's. I'm walking around and I'm looking at things and now my music's moving around. I don't like it. Next question.
David Brady, New York, with a question. The Beacon Theater, down the block from home, is debuting its Sphere Immersive Sound this September. What is the science behind this witchcraft?
This is going to be really interesting. There's a lot of, it says, they're adding a lot of speakers, and this is the places that we've seen this the most have been Myers Constellation Systems, L Acoustic. Those have been the big ones that have done these immersive sound. This is done by Holosphere, I believe, or Holoplot, and it's probably similar to this. Go ahead, Jeff.
So Holoplot is a 96 driver planar speaker. It's 80 tweeters and I guess 16 woofers that each have individual amplifiers and individual DSP channels. And so you can beamform where the audio goes.
Yeah.
I'll put a link to the actual Holoplot speaker.
That's really interesting. And a lot of these are really interesting. When you're in a large Myers system, in a theater that I was in that had all these speakers, one of the things they pointed out was that you don't have, everything sounded normal, but they said all the reverb that you're hearing is actually being created by the speakers. There's mics in the setup and it's just created by the speakers, and they turned it off and immediately your ears felt like they went and just pulled out of your head because they were adding that all back in. So a lot of these beamforming and software defined surround is quite amazing. And as we go through this once a month, we'll start bringing in some of these vendors to talk about what they do. Next question.
Christian Ortiz from South Florida. What is the basic setup to capture separate channels?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Primarily, you are miking your sources individually and then panning them around in the space using your mixing platform. There are 5171 capturing, mic configurations that you can set up, like, with a Deca tree, but it's still the same thing. You have those individual mics that you are panning around. An outlier to that would be ambisonics, whatever ambisonics format you capture in first, second, third order, you would then decode that group of channels to the specific channel format that you need, either 5171 at most.
Good, Karl.
Yeah, as Mickey said, you may close mic something or record things individually, and then in the mix you'll put them into surround. So a lot of the surround is actually done in the mix. But as Mickey said, you can actually get atmospheric stuff via ambisonics. And of course, MBO is not just a sound bar, it's also a microphone made by Sennheiser. So essentially this is kind of the Mix Pre 6. This is where this lives. Mix Pre 6 was designed to record these kind of microphones. These have 4 microphones built into one, and the Mix Pre 6 has 4 parity, so they have 4 equal phantom powered inputs that are very high quality. So you can use Mix Pre 6 to actually record these type of microphones perfectly. And then in the mix, you can actually choose how you want to process them, and you can process them in binaural, or you can actually process them back out to like a 5.1 as well, with a center, left, right, and a rear. So it's up to you in the software how you want to process it.
Next question.
Samuel Nordvik from Norway. Can a surround live stream system potentially be used to stream out several audio tracks that can be mixed by the listener? For example, several language translations on the same stream.
Go ahead, Mickey.
If you have a surround transmission system, you essentially have at least 6 channels. If you want to, you can reconfigure some of those channels for for interpretation. But typically, if you are broadcasting in surround, you would then broadcast additional channels on top of that to use for your localization. Sometimes you would just replace the center channel if all your dialogue's coming out of the center. Sometimes you'd replace LCR. But if you have more complex panning that happens in your programming, you might need to replace all the channels.
Yeah, because you have to mix it in. You have to think about the fact that you really have to remix a lot of certain parts. If anything's coming out of something other than the center channel, with you have to kind of think about where you're going to put that in. This is again where we're going to experiment with using. I believe that we may move to wanting to use. I think it's going to be really interesting to see if we can use a surround right or left to push translation into, like someone sitting over your shoulder, because I think you get to then experience the show the way it was designed, plus get the language that you need. And I think that could be really interesting. But back to Mickey's point, we tend to build entirely new ladders for each one of those. So if there's the English translation, it is now we can separate those so that you have a mainstream, but we have to replace all that audio. And because those audio is coming to you separately, we can stack those. It's not like we're changing the video, but we do have to bring those audio in as a separate feed. Go ahead, Karl.
Yeah, so as Alex said, you need to stack different languages generally. The biggest problem is in consumer consumption devices that decode surround sound and send it out to the speakers. You don't have any control. You have very little control of actually just switching off the speakers. You sometimes can mute the speakers, but to some, like the sound bar, you may not have any control of actually turning off center and doing that kind of stuff. For creation tools, because you need the tool to actually go in. If you want to send like stems and do the mix that you're in, is that what your question was asking? If you want to send down stems, you can do it, but you would need to have some creation tools at your end, not consumption tools. Consumption tools just don't have the ability to separate the audio out and mix it. Pretty much, there are some tools out there that can do it. You can convert to XLR from it, and then take that XLR, put into a mixer, I have to admit that I keep on not ordering, but thinking I should order the stem player from Kanye or Ye. Release the stem player where you have some of those controls to remix songs to your interest. I thought that was a really interesting release. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I think to Samuel's question, if you were point to point from an intelligent user to an intelligent user, you could use a 5.1 stream to send 5 individual mono separate languages. But doing that, as Karl said, to a consumer destination, there's no way. You'd always have the fail problem of it down mixing to stereo and hearing all the languages at once.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is the brain, as far as language goes, the brain can only accept one stream of language at a time. You know this if you've ever tried to read subtitles of an English-based or a language of your native language choice. If you're reading the subtitles, you're not listening, and if you're listening, you're not reading. So your brain can only process one of those language channels at a time. In broadcast, there is a thing called SAP, Second Audio Program, and it's been incorporated in broadcast for the last 25 years or so, where you can transmit a second language channel on the SAP channel, and most receivers have the ability to turn it on and off so that you can switch between the primary audio and the SAP program, so you can send second languages that way. But mixing it, as everyone said, mixing it into a 5.1 is a recipe for disaster, because you can't control how much it's mixed in and whether it's playing all the languages at once, etc.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how useful is Waves NX for mixing surround projects without a proper surround monitoring system?
Go, Jason.
Yeah, of all the ways to do this, Waves is the least impressive to me.
Next question.
Timo Caligo, Austin, Texas. Thank you all for your time and contribution to the show. What brands or models of amplification systems are used for the multi-channel surround in theaters with 10, 20, or more channels? And are there any for home use?
Go ahead, Mickey.
What I see most often is Crown power amps for cinemas, of course, tied in with JBL theatrical speakers. that's what I see by far the most. Followed by QSC power amps.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, what reverb ambience processing is used to create an environment when mixing music in surround?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I've tried to coin this term for using reverb, which is the mullet verb. Short in the front, long in the rear.
Mullet verb. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and one type of verb that kind of fits that would be hall verbs. I tend to use hall verbs quite a bit for music and surround. But
do you have any,
day,
any specific ones that you like the best?
Oh, specific plugins?
Yeah.
H verb is nice and playful. I love all the Waves hybrid stuff are very playful and musical. We can't go wrong with Altiverb.
I was going to ask you, is Altiverb something that are they kind of the standard there?
There's no
standard.
Real standard. Well, sorry. Okay, Altiverb you can find in every studio. Every studio you should be able to expect Altiverb, at least in the post-production world. But yeah, if we talk about plugins, it's going to be another second hour. But yeah, just to finish my answer on Douglas's question, whatever works with the track that you're mixing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Karl.
So I'm going to talk hardware. So the Integra 7 from Roland, it's actually a synthesizer that has 5.1 out. So it has, of course, a whole effect section can go into 5.1, but also all the instruments can go into 5.1 as well. So it's a crazy box. It's getting pretty old now. It's 9 years old, but I still sell it because it's the only box that does that. And then as far as effects processor that's in hardware, which would be the Eventide H9000, which is $10,000. It sits at the top. Every studio has one. Steve Vai, had half of his career have a guitar go through that and pretty much made it. And that does like 22.2 out. It's $10,000. It can do whatever you want.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, Mimo Live can only accept a stereo audio mix. How can you stream and surround with common software tools like Mimo Live?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to go out on a limb because most of the people here know more about this than I do, but I would say safely no. Like pretty much no, unless you're going to render the binaural audio and then throw it through the... No, not really.
Go ahead, Tony.
I just want to invite you to come to Conversation with Tony Mobley tomorrow evening. Oliver will be on Conversation with Tony Mobley. You can ask him.
So Oliver from Mimo Live, who's the creator of Mimo Live, will be on Conversation with Tony Mobley tomorrow. So I definitely agree. You should, Douglas, you should go and ask Oliver if he has any plans for 5.1 or immersive. I think that would be great. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Conversation with Tony Mobley. You can find it on YouTube. It's great. Mickey?
There are people out there that have worked on builds of OBS that are capable of sending out more than stereo.
So theoretically, though, if you wanted to, not so much for 5.1, but for binaural, you could theoretically do something crazy, like send it to at least a studio, mix the whole thing, output it as binaural, and push it into Mimo. Mickey,
for those who master their live streams, it's not impossible.
But yeah, Mickey, is that?
Yeah, you could put out the binaural render of Elisa Studio is really just meant for monitoring of the engineer, like for pre-dubs, pre-mixing. But you can, I guess, if you want to send that out to a broadcast.
It's like you can really eat that horse burger if you want to, but I wouldn't suggest it. All right. So anyway, I got it. I get where you're coming from. All right. Wow, what a great couple hours. This was a really, really fun. It was really fun to see some of our OGs here, our audio OGs coming back. So thanks for Mickey and Jeff and Todd. It's good to see you, and of course all the regulars here, and Karl, but all the regulars here that fill this all in and made it really great. So anyway, really, really good second hour, really good first hour, lots of great audio questions and great questions in general. So it was just fantastic and really great questions. So we did 56 questions today, all mostly about audio, and covered a lot of great subjects. So really, really well done by the producers of some thoughtful questions. And We can't do it without the panel. So thank you guys for coming and hanging out and sharing your wealth of knowledge. And thanks to the crew in the back end that makes us look great. You guys are doing a great job 7 days a week. Everyone's putting this together and making it all work. And just really, really fantastic job. All right. Long one. Let's get to after hours. All right, here we go. This is where we're going to put some surround.
Yes, the whispering in surround.
It'll be all around you.
Reverb.
Yeah,
Darn, I miss the whispering.
Yes. Even little people. Yes. Oh, the giants of midnight.
Yes.
Then reverb. Extra scary.
Extra scary.
Pretty scary stuff, eh, kiddies?
See, Mitchell, you're breaking the whole mood here.